finally have it, guys. I finally have the Framework 16 laptop. This is probably the most anticipated thing that I've ever gotten here in the studio. In fact, everyone in the comment section has been asking me about the Framework 16 laptop, even in the 16-inch gaming laptop runner video that I did last year. Everyone was like, where's the Framework 16? Why'd you include it? Well, the truth is, it's been really difficult to get my hands on this laptop. In fact, right now, at the time of making this video, it's still in the pre-order phase. In fact, Framework is pretty transparent about their shipping updates on Reddit and of course their community tab on their official website. So yeah, they're still kind of working out a few kinks. I think this is probably one of the first batches that I've received, and yeah, I'm excited to unbox it, set it up, and share my experience with you guys. Let's go.
Alright, so let's break down this unboxing experience. First off, big shout out to Framework for the neat presentation. I have the DIY edition, and don't worry, putting it all together is a breeze, just trust the process. They've even included a cool poster and some stylish stickers to set the mood. Now, onto the good stuff. You get the expansion modules for the I/O, the keyboard module, and the bezel. As you can see, I have both black and orange accents. We also get some spacers to configure the keyboard layout, a couple of LED matrix modules for that retro vibe, and an RGB macro pad for some extra flair. Plus, they threw in a handy screwdriver to put everything together. And then we get to the laptop, but we're not done yet, since underneath you'll find two DDR5 16GB modules, a 2TB SN740 NVMe SSD, and an expansion base shell to reduce the weight of the laptop. Now, out of the box, the 16 does come with an AMD RX 7700S graphics module, but this can be changed based on how you configure the specs on their website. We also get an extra 2TB NVMe SSD that kicks things up a notch with Gen 4 speeds and a 180-watt power adapter. It's compact and comes with a removable USB-C cable. That's how the laptop powers up.
To be honest with you, looking at all these components, it's actually pretty overwhelming, but at the end of the day, if you actually look at these parts, it's pretty cool. It's like building a Lego set, but for laptops. I mean, the fact that I can just hold a USB-A port, HDMI port, memory modules, and, you know, keyboard switches. I mean, it makes me excited about what this thing could actually potentially become in the next 2 to 3 to 10 years. So I'm going to scan the QR code and build this thing out. Should be pretty straightforward, but fingers crossed.
I've got to say, my first impressions with the build quality on the 16 is really impressive. The whole chassis is constructed out of magnesium alloy and machined aluminum. It's only 0.83 inches thin and it weighs around 5.3 pounds, which is pretty fair for a 16-inch laptop. Once you remove the plastic tray covering the input deck, you'll notice a few cool aesthetic pieces like the sticker listing the team members behind the project. But anyways, the first step is to remove the touchpad spacers, which can be done by opening the latches over here. Then you're going to slide out the trackpad module and then proceed to disconnect the mid-plate cable. Now this is the main interface for the keyboard, trackpad, and all the customizable modules that you'll be installing later on top of the deck. Next up, I'm going to use the included screwdriver to unscrew the 16 captive fasteners attaching the mid-plate to the bottom cover. I really appreciate how they are labeled, and Framework recommends you to remove them in order. You'll eventually see it loosen up, and just like that, it comes up easily, exposing the internal components. As you can see, you have 2 RAM slots with maximum supported memory up to 64 GB, 2 M.2 slots, one of which is a 2230 socket layered beneath the standard 2280 socket. I really appreciate the inclusion of these QR codes as well on every component, which gives you access to repair and replacement guides for each component. I'm going to go ahead and install these M.2 drives. Now, if you built a PC before, this should feel like home. Do note that the smaller socket requires you to push the SSD into the slot since it does not support angle-based installations like the primary SSD. Then I moved on to the memory modules. Now, once again, it's a very straightforward process. Just insert the module at an angle, aligning the pins, and press it down until you hear a click. The next step is to place the mid-plate back onto the system, connect the main cable, and then tighten these 16 fasteners that are labeled in order. Next up, we have the keyboard module. All you have to do is just line it up with the guided lines printed on the mid-plate, and with the keyboard held at a 20-degree angle, just slide it up the notch, lower the keyboard, and it should magnetically snap in place. You can then proceed to install the spacers similar to how we did the keyboard. The same thing applies to the LED matrix modules. And in terms of configuring your keyboard layout, Framework gives you the option to place it on the left-hand side with spacers, or a numpad, or the RGB macro pad, or vice versa. Again, this all comes down to your preference, and I love this customizable approach. It's beautifully engineered. I'm just going to stick to the center layout just to keep things symmetrical. And the last piece of the puzzle is to install the bezel, which magnetically snaps onto the frame. Now, when it comes to installing these expansion cards for the I/O, you're only allowed to populate them with 6 of them at a time, and I have 8 of them that Framework sent. So I'm going to have to pick and choose what ports I need. That's the beauty of this laptop. I mean, this is insane. This is so cool. Okay, I think I jumped the gun a little too early on this one. So Framework actually mentions that there are certain expansion cards that work with certain slots. In fact, they've laid it out from 1 to 6 on their website, guiding through which one takes advantage of which port. So for instance, port number 1 supports USB 4, DisplayPort, and of course higher power delivery, whereas certain ports don't necessarily have the capability to push DisplayPort signal or HDMI signal. I'll leave a screenshot so you guys can take a look at what exactly each slot can support. So I'm gonna just reconfigure this to make sure that I get the most out of them. All right, so the first message we got here is default boot device missing, which makes sense because there is no Windows operating system for this laptop to read off of. So just like building a PC, you're gonna have to create a Windows bootable USB drive. Now, the Framework 16 laptop uses an custom AMD Wi-Fi driver, which unfortunately Windows 11, it doesn't actually include the drivers for it, so you might actually get stuck during the Windows installation process. So Framework actually recommends you to go through using a third-party application called Rufus. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but yeah, we're going to download that. Basically, just download the ISO file from Microsoft and then just create the USB drive, which is pretty straightforward. It takes about 30 minutes. I've already done that, so all I have to do is just plug this into the USB port, power off the system first, plug this in, and then install Windows. So hopefully it's going to be a smooth sailing from here on. All right, so I've spent a few weeks with this laptop and I've got some thoughts. So first of all, if you're wondering about drivers for the components, since we started off with a clean version of Windows, Framework has you covered. So all I had to do was download the latest driver pack listed on their webpage, and it went through a step-by-step process to install the AMD chipset drivers, the GPU drivers, audio networking drivers, and so on. So within a matter of 5 minutes and a reboot, this laptop was ready to rock and roll. I have to say, working with a clean version of Windows without any bloatware is just so refreshing to see, and I love it. Now, when considering pricing, be cautious of the base $1,400 that's listed on Framework's website. That doesn't even include the expansion cards with the I/O, the power adapter, or even a licensed copy of Windows. So you can choose to go with the DIY route, but that's going to start adding up in cost when you start configuring the memory, storage, and the graphics card setups. But there's also the option to go with a pre-built option. Now that gives you 3 different tiers. There's the performance tier, which costs about $60.99, but there is a catch that only comes with 6 USB-C ports. Now you can't split them between USB-C and USB-A, but if you want to add an HDMI port or even an audio jack, that's going to cost you more. In fact, the fact that audio expansion card is an extra $20, I feel like that's a little too much. That should have been included with the laptop in the first place. But yeah, it's something to be aware of. My ideal configuration would definitely be audio, 1 HDMI, 2 USB-A, and 2 USB-C. That's ideally the setup that I would go with in terms of ports. And that's going to set you back a little over $1,700. Now, Framework is offering a Performance Pro tier, which honestly is just giving you Windows 11 Pro. I don't even know why that's there in the first place. And then there's the Overkill tier, which gets you a Ryzen 9 CPU with twice the memory and twice the storage. But the interesting thing is, it doesn't even come with a discrete GPU. So if I were to click on the RX 7700S GPU option, that's going to set you back around $2,500 or a little over that. And honestly, I feel like that's a little too much for a GPU of that caliber. Framework sent us the cream of the crop spec with a Ryzen 9 CPU, 32 gigs of RAM, 4 terabytes of SSD storage, and a bunch of extra goodies, including the LED matrix display, and it comes to about $3,000. You see, when I see a number like that, I would think twice before spending my own money on it. But I have to take a step back and look at Framework's intention with this laptop, because their whole MO is about investing into something that's going to last you for an extended lifetime, given its upgradability and repairability aspects. So Let's dissect that. Now, from the outside, they've adopted a minimalistic approach in designing the 16. It just looks like an average work or school laptop. It lacks any distinctive premium elements that we find on some of the more expensive brands out there. There are certain things that make it look somewhat dated. For instance, this massive chin at the bottom of the display just takes up way too much space, which also adds to the depth of the laptop, and that makes it extremely challenging to fit inside my backpack that can easily fit something like the Lenovo Yoga Pro 9i. And remember, this is also a 16-inch laptop as well that has way better specs than the Framework 16. I mean, just take a look at these side by side. I'll let you make the call. It comes in the silver finish with some black accents to add some nice contrast. Is it gonna win any design awards? Probably not. But from a functional standpoint, it ticks all the boxes without causing any distraction. Remember, every single component of this laptop is user replaceable. So I have to give a massive credit to the team at Framework for delivering something that meets somewhere in between functional and somewhat modern looking. What about build quality? Well, truth is, it isn't the greatest that I've seen on a Windows laptop. For instance, the display, which by the way can be opened with one hand, exhibits some flexing when you manipulate it around the corners. It also creaks a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you can hear that, but yeah, that's a little bit concerning. You're gonna find a few plastic bits here and there that show some flex, especially with the keyboard, but other than those minor concerns, this thing is put together pretty well. Now, while we're on the topic of the keyboard, I have to say, it's not the best or the worst that you can find on a laptop. Now, these switches feature 1.5 millimeters of key travel, and it gets the job done. I mean, I had no issues writing out this script for the video, but personally, I do find the switches on ZenBooks, Yogas, and I guess to an extent, XPS laptops to be more superior because this just feels a little bit too plasticky, a little bit too cheap, a bit too hollow when you bottom out the keys. And they also don't feature any fingerprint resistant coating applied on top of the keycaps, so it's just a basic setup that just gets the job done. Nothing mind-blowing. But you never know. Maybe Framework will release a more robust and premium module in the next year or so that users can easily upgrade to, offering a potential solution down the line. Let's actually take a quick listen to how these switches sound. Now, this is an RGB keyboard, and there is a little bit of bleeding around the edges of the keycaps, but that isn't a big deal. I've seen worse on other laptops. But I really wished if Framework included a piece of software to make quick adjustments on the fly. Now, by default, there are hotkeys programmed to adjust the lighting effects, controlling RGB hue, saturation, brightness, and animation speeds. Unfortunately, it's not labeled on the keys, so you're gonna have to refer to the manual every now and then to do that. I mean, there's a lot to memorize, and to be honest, it's just quite inconvenient. You can also remap these keys via the online QMK tool. The LED matrix module is mostly just a gimmick. Once installed, it showcases a few animations during a cool boot, then it just disappears. And if you need anything to be displayed, you can either use the custom online drawing tool or a downloadable LED matrix tool, which is in beta mode, which basically allows you to display different effects, the time, and set a timer. But I should point out that I experienced a lot of crashes with the software the moment I started tinkering with the effects. It's just not polished, and I highly recommend you staying away from these modules, and they're expensive as well. Oh, and there's also the RGB macro pad. Now, this is just a glorified version of the regular number pad that Framework offers. It's cool, but if you really like Rainbow Puke and macros, go for it. But there are a few things to keep an eye out for. For one, the lighting effects on the keyboard cannot be synchronized with this macro pad. So if you want to disable RGB or adjust the brightness levels, you're gonna have to do them separately on the keyboard module and this. So they're two separate things, two separate steps, which is weird. You see, from a hardware standpoint, I love the fact that you can expand your keyboard layout. Framework even offers this keyboard in different languages, but I just feel like this whole experience could have been much better if they just included a piece of software to synchronize it all. Because let's say, for instance, you want to adjust the lighting effects, just, remap these buttons or just customize to whatever you want. A few simple clicks would have saved at least me a ton of time. The power button also acts as a fingerprint reader to log into Windows. It works pretty well on my unit. There's no support for Windows Hello, so that's something to keep note of. Moving on to the trackpad, this is a glass surface with Windows precision drivers, which is probably one of the best specs that you can find for a laptop. I had a smooth experience navigating through Windows and other applications. It's precise, it's super smooth. I didn't experience any skips or stutters. The integrated left and right buttons are well defined. I am aware that some reviewers have expressed concerns with palm rejection, but luckily, on my sample, I didn't encounter any of those issues. It's also worth pointing out that since this is a modular laptop where you can swap out your keyboard and trackpad layouts, the spacers aren't glued together, so there's a very good chance for stuff to get through these gaps, especially liquid. So you got to be extremely careful with that kind of thing when it's around this laptop. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Framework 16 gives you the ability to customize your port setup by using their expansion cards. They offer a variety of options ranging from 1 terabyte storage cards, audio port, display port, Ethernet, HDMI 2.0B, meaning it can only support up to 4K at 60 Hz, micro SD. They're actually currently working on a full-size SD card module, which is pretty cool. There's also USB 3.2 Gen 2, USB-C ports. Now there is an extra USB-C port at the back of the graphics module, which is a display alt mode. Basically what that means is it's linked directly to the graphics card, so it doesn't get rerouted through the iGPU, which is pretty neat. Keep in mind that it doesn't accept power, but if you do need to convert it to a display port or HDMI output, well, all you can do is just remove one of these ports, pop them at the back, and you're good to go.
So this is what the webcam looks like on the Framework 16. Now, they are using a 2.1 megapixel 1080p sensor, and the quality is not the greatest I've seen from my laptop. The image in general is more leaning towards the contrasty side, plus my skin tones are a little bit more towards the cooler side of things. The microphone quality is decent. It sounds a little bit more compressed, but I do appreciate the inclusion of privacy control switches for both the microphone and the camera. I think this just gives users an added peace of mind when it comes to security.
Okay, so the speakers are positioned on the sides, which offer better sound quality compared to most gaming laptops with bottom-facing setups. However, these still come across as somewhat muted, with minimal emphasis on the trebles and less pronounced bass. It's nothing mind-blowing, but hey, maybe in the future, again, I'm just suggesting Framework, you can probably come up with front-facing modules for an enhanced audio experience. I know some engineer at Framework is probably thinking, Eber, what are you talking about? That's probably the most complex thing ever, but you never know. It's a possibility. Now, shifting gears to the display, you're greeted with a 16-inch 16:10 Quad HD Plus panel. And while it might not offer the most vibrant colors and deeper contrasts that we're known to with OLED panels, it still remains visually stunning, offering 100% sRGB, 88% Dolby RGB, and 100% P3. This makes it more than adequate for productivity and multimedia tasks. You can also get away with a little bit of photo and video editing as well, but it's worth noting that there are superior options from Asus, Razer, Lenovo, Dell, and even Apple. In terms of brightness output, my unit was easily able to maintain a little over 500 nits of peak SDR performance, which is pretty impressive. And when you couple that with a fast and fluid 165 Hz refresh rate with FreeSync, the gaming experience is exceptional. Although it is important to note that the RX 7700S GPU isn't the fastest available, so achieving frame rates above 120 frames per second at 1600p may be a bit challenging, so you might have to go into the settings to lower those to get a playable experience. Now, while we're on the topic of gaming, let's talk about that real quickly. So Framework says that the RX 7700S GPU can be used for intense gaming sessions, and you all know that that's not close to what you can expect in reality, because this GPU is strictly like a mid-tier card that can expect to perform closer to something like an RTX 4060. In fact, this laptop doesn't even have any custom power performance modes. All you get is the default Windows power plans, which is efficiency, balanced, and best performance. So when comparing these modes, you'll notice that the RX 7700S operates at its maximum TGP of 100 watts, indicating that Framework hasn't restricted the power supply for the GPU. Now, this is impressive considering its modularity. Now, the performance differences between balanced and best performance is very minimal because they exhibit similar clock speeds, temperatures, and noise levels. So how does that translate to gaming? Well, in a nutshell, the RX 7700S offers performance roughly between an RTX 4070 running at 90 watts and a 4060 running at 97 watts. I would say that this laptop strikes a perfect balance between performance and power efficiency. Are you getting the best performance for the dollar? Not really. But you have to realize that Framework had very limited resources compared to the other big players, which is why this was their only viable option for sourcing GPUs. I mean, we are all aware of how difficult it is to work with NVIDIA and their million restrictions. Shifting gears to the Ryzen 9 7840HS CPU, once again, you're not going to notice a huge difference between balanced and best performance modes. They run pretty much identically in terms of clock speeds and temperatures. I should also point out that it doesn't run quite either. I mean, the cooling system is working pretty hard to keep the CPU and GPU under control. And as for surface temperatures, this thing is engineered brilliantly because it's exhausting all the heat at the back and the sides, so it's not trapped in the keyboard area. There is a little bit of a hotspot right in the top center portion of the D cover, so just be aware of that. As for real-world performance, it's worth noting that the Ryzen 9 CPU stands as a reliable performer, particularly in multi-core workloads. While it is true that AMD systems may not match Intel's counterparts in certain scenarios, it's essential to recognize the efficiency of Ryzen processors. In fact, if you look closer, there are instances where the CPU outperforms counterparts like the Core i9-3950HX found in something like the Blade 16. Whether you're compiling code, rendering 3D scenes in Maya, or editing photos, you're guaranteed to expect solid performance out of this chip. I should also point out that the combination of the Ryzen CPU and a Radeon GPU is advantageous for Resolve users because AMD has some secret sauce to make this thing export videos super fast. However, I can't say the same thing for Adobe Premiere because it is an exception as it doesn't particularly favor the CPU. So the best option would be to go for an Intel-based device since their QuickSync engine can significantly reduce rendering time in this program. What about battery life? So the Framework 16 comes with an 85 watt-hour battery, and from our tests, this thing was able to get close to 9 hours of use on our light load scenarios, which is actually pretty decent. And if we switch to a medium workload where you're watching a 4K YouTube video, you can expect close to 6 hours of battery life on this laptop. But if you're doing something intensive, let's say you're going balls to the walls with the CPU, then yeah, you can expect a little less than an hour and a half with this laptop. But you know what would have been awesome? If Framework included a hot swappable battery module, because that would have just changed the laptop industry. You know, a lot of people in the forums were asking about this. In fact, I remember back in the day when I used to carry like a Dell XPS, I think it was an XPS 15, like one of those older generation modules where I could just simply swap out batteries. I would just carry another battery pack with me that I could just simply swap out. I mean, those were the good old days, but it just would have been awesome if we had that option with this laptop. But who knows? Maybe with the next generation design, it could be a possibility. So we've looked at the gaming performance, we've looked at the thermal performance, but I want to shift gears and now talk about the whole upgradability aspect of this laptop, because that's been making a lot of waves in the tech industry. We've seen companies try and fail with this approach. So what makes Framework stand out? Well, at the core, this company is all about extending the lifespan of their devices and reducing electronic waste. And I'm 100% on board with that. It's our responsibility to care for the environment. The idea of upgradable GPUs and mainboards with potentially faster CPUs, it's also a really clever engineering concept that also offers users flexibility and future-proofing. They've also embraced open source ecosystems, basically encouraging innovation from the community. There's also Framework Marketplace, which basically simplifies the process, providing a convenient hub for purchasing new modules and parts. But there are some posing questions and concerns that I'd like to share. For instance, are users going to get any incentives or credit when they choose to trade in their components for a later spec in 2 to 3 years? And let's not forget, these mainboards with the CPUs are almost $1,000, which ain't cheap. I'm also a bit concerned about long-term durability with these components. And while the company's efforts are commendable, it's essential to consider both the benefits and potential challenges of their approach. You see, as consumers, we play a crucial role in driving progress towards more sustainable tech solutions. And while this product is impressive, I'm concerned about Framework's long-term growth over the next 4 to 10 years. This might explain why larger laptop manufacturers just hesitate to follow this path, because it could lead to products becoming outdated, resulting in fewer new and innovative designs. And look, guys, it's too early to tell since this is a very new company and I believe in what they're trying to accomplish. But we can't overlook the numerous challenges that they're going to face. Many of you in the comments and forums have been curious about Intel and NVIDIA RTX options, but as of now, Framework hasn't confirmed if that's even happening. There's no roadmap which is a bit of a red flag to me. I think you're buying into this product based on future upgradability rather than the price to performance aspect, because this laptop at its current price just doesn't yield the performance that we expected. Plus, it also is running an older version of a Ryzen 7000 series CPU, whereas AMD has already announced their Hawkpoint 8000 series chips for laptops this year. It's something to think about, guys. So that's the Framework 16. I genuinely want to hear your thoughts about it in the comments, guys. I truly believe in this product. It's just that for the price, might be a little too high, and if you guys already have one, curious to hear about your experience. I'm Ibra with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.